Hello, this is Dr. Schemberger, and we are going to focus in this particular brief video about testing data. Part of an education journalist's job is to follow the trends of what the test data are showing as far as student success in a particular district as well as statewide. So we are going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to do a share screen. Here we go. And there we go. So believe it or not, Kentucky was actually a front runner in standardized testing. It has created what a lot of us in education news reporting call the test mania. It really started around 1990. The Kentucky Education Reform Act helped to set the pace. It was House Bill 940. The CARA, as you probably have heard it called before, stemmed from a lawsuit that was filed. It was a ruling that determined in the case of Rose versus Council for Better Education, that schools were inequitable and inefficient. In fact, we were seeing how sometimes pots of money were going to favor one school, but another school wasn't being treated in the same manner. So there were a lot of inequities that were discovered as a result of this lawsuit. The Supreme Court ruling also gave the charge to the General Assembly to revamp Kentucky's education system in 3 different areas: finance, governance, and curriculum. The finance, we now have a pot of money at the state level. It's called the Support Education Excellence in Kentucky, known as SEEK funding. Every school district in Kentucky is able to tap into this based on their student enrollment for a particular academic year. Governance, this is where it's set aside that we have school-based decision-making councils. So that was a big part of it. The school councils get to determine their curriculum needs. And then, of course, curriculum. It extends more into that. But also it gave kind of the statewide blanket of really what students need to learn in order to be competitive with others across the United States and across the world. So this was all designed to enhance educational opportunities for students in Kentucky, regardless of the property wealth of the district in which they lived. After a while, the federal administrators in education, not only Kentucky, there were other states too that were really starting to do more with standardized testing. It led to 2002's No Child Left Behind, and that has been a staple in the foundations of how education has come to be. It came as a result of action that Congress took when it reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also known as No Child Left Behind. That's how it was renamed. That occurred in 2001. You're going to see Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA, often in news stories. And it came as a result of really in the 1960s. And over time, that particular act is reauthorized and thus renamed. So in 2002, it became No Child Left Behind. And this, what it did basically is that it required reading and math tests to children in grades 3rd through 8th grade, and then once in high school. But what we also saw from No Child Left Behind is this buzzword that is still rather prevalent in today's education news circles, and that's accountability. That teachers are accountable. Schools are accountable to make sure that students are learning. After about a few years, the tables kind of turned, because now we've got to make sure that students are accountable too, just like you. You know, it's up to you to view these lectures and to do your work and to do all that's expected of a student. So accountability is now it's played on both sides of the fences now. No Child also imposed a series of various consequences. Schools that failed to show what is known as adequately yearly progress on state exams, that's what No Child did. But what No Child also achieved is that it left it up to the states to determine where that bar should be set on their standardized test. So again, the federal government didn't decide what those particular standards are. They just gave the task to states to say, you've got to come up with a system, so that way we can make sure that we're all doing our part, that no child is left behind. But the thing is that when you leave it up to each state to do what it wants to do, you're going to have disparities, and that's what occurred here. Students there were different levels as to really what student success looked like in each state. So we didn't have any harmony. The intent was good, but the outcome didn't really come to be what it needed it to be. It was too prescriptive in some cases. It was just really unworkable and unmanageable. So that led to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It's also known as the nation's report card. And here we see representative samples of students. So not all students, just a sample of students in the 4th, 8th, and 12th grades in various subjects. So this didn't have student level achievement scores, and it was not tied to accountability requirements, also not linked to a specific set of standards being implemented in the schools. So you've got results that can be interpreted and used in any way a district, a teacher, uh, any type of school system wanted to use it for. That's a little dangerous. You've got to make sure that the data can be both valid and reliable, and this is what was not occurring here. So we operated on that up until about 2008, 2009, and then we have Common Core. President Obama at that time in his administration, he basically took the nation's governors of all 50 states and as well as DC and gave them the task to come up with a way that we can have a single minimum cut score that students had to have on the test to be designated proficient. So that led to Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, and it's the latest attempt to bring together standards and assessments among all the states in the country and how we can really try to establish a uniform way of accountability measures. Well, taking Common Core, the General Assembly in Kentucky then in 2009 developed what is called Unbridled Spirit. At least it was that for about 7 to 8 years. And what Unbridled Spirit did was that in addition to looking at test data, we're also concerned with how students in high school, are they transitioning to college well, or are they also transitioning to professional jobs okay, careers, because not everybody's going to go to college right after high school. It also looked at end of course exams. It was believed that end of course exams, EOC exams, might be better predictors of student success because it's more comprehensive than just a standardized test would be. That stayed in effect until about 2016, and this is where we are now with Kentucky Senate Bill 1. Basically what this mandated now is that which started in 2017-18 school year, and then every 6 years academic standards and assessments have to be reviewed for possible replacement or just some revision. Now that's not to say there aren't revisions that go on at the state level. There are still some, but the tweaks are minor, so that way it doesn't affect tremendously the what the real intent of the state assessment plan should be. Also on the federal level, we have a reauthorization of ESSA in 2015. It was reauthorized from the 1965 legislation, Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which I referred to earlier. It came out of President Johnson's tenure, in which he believed that full educational opportunity should be the first national goal, even though it's not mentioned in the Constitution that that's the federal government's responsibility. But yet he recognized that it's still a goal that the United States should have for everyone in the country. So ESEA, in many ways, is a civil rights law. We got to make sure that every child, every learner in Kentucky has an opportunity to a full education opportunity system. Going back to Kentucky a little bit, we still operate with 3 different classifications as a result of Common Core. We've still kind of kept this to some extent in the current state law, where we classify schools as to whether they've been distinguished. In other words, are they reaching the top 10%? Proficient, then are they residing more in that middle to upper level, and then schools that need improvement. So they're in the perhaps in the bottom 40%, and those are the schools that we want to try to help and pay attention to. In addition, there are achievement levels: distinguished, proficient, apprentice, and novice. Students who score really well on these tests, as well as the other measures, are deemed distinguished or proficient. And a lot of schools have various award ceremonies to kind of help recognize those students. The apprentice and novice, we want to move more of those students up into proficient and distinguished. So how do we do that? That's what teachers are educated to do. So novice reduction is the number one goal of any public school in Kentucky. How do we move more and more students out of novice up the ladder of student achievement? These are some of the measures that the current state law requires schools to basically monitor and track growth in their students as far as the academic performance levels. What is also the academic achievement gap? How's that closing among various different populations, to include those in low socioeconomic status? How do we close the achievement gap in some of the racial and ethnic groups? How do we close achievement gaps in between male and female students? So those are things to watch as well. Obviously, we want to watch how many students are moving up into proficiency, especially in the categories of reading and mathematics. Other academic indicators that are important to watch too are your science and social studies. How are students transitioning from high school to life? Whatever that might be. Basically, are we encouraging more students to go to college? Or if they're choosing not to go to college, are we making better success in trying to get them to be employable after high school? And then opportunity and access. Do students have the resources available to be successful? So schools are measured in that regard, on these various metrics, and these can change again according to state law, but these are the main ones for right now. And that concludes our focus on test data. Thank you for your attention.